On today's Locked On Jayhawks, Kansas looks to build some momentum after the Iowa State win by taking on a red-hot Kansas State Wildcats team. We preview the Jayhawks and the Wildcats.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode, and you can find us anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. On today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're previewing the Kansas State matchup. We'll get into the headlines, what happened in the last meeting between these two, the Kansas State scouting report, keys to the game, and players to watch on this episode of LOJ. First, we are brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Super Bowl 59 is here, coming up on Sunday, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. Kansas State, Saturday afternoon game. And as far as the big headlines coming into this one, I think from the Kansas perspective, they're trying to build some momentum, right? You come off some of these tough Saturday losses, and I guess trying to win on a Saturday would be one of these two. But you had an opportunity to turn things around. It seemed like in the Saturday game against Baylor, and you almost did, and then the second half happened, right? But you at least made a stand on Monday night against Iowa State. Now, is that just going to be, hey, you were coming off a loss, you're playing at Allen Fieldhouse, and Iowa State's kind of in a rut right now? Or are you going to allow that to turn into the start of a kick of momentum if you are Kansas? You look at the upcoming schedule for really the next 4 games after this one, maybe 5 games after this one, and there's an opportunity to rack up some wins. Doesn't mean Kansas will win every game, but you know it's a better opportunity than some of the recent games, like playing at Baylor or against Houston or some of these teams. But standing in their way is Kansas State, who they're looking to keep up their momentum. They are one of the hottest teams, not just in the conference, but in the country right now in terms of how they are playing at this moment in time. They've won 4 straight games, and since January 25th, when that 4-game winning streak began, they're one of the top 3 teams in the country, according to Bart Torvik, and they own a top 25 offense and top 10 defense in that span, which, again, small sample size, but they're playing good basketball at this point in time. Now, you look at what happened in the most recent outing between Kansas and Kansas State. Jayhawks won 84-74 in Allen Fieldhouse. And there was a game where Kansas got off to a really strong start. I think it was 14-0 to kick off the game. They ended up, from there playing close to even. Kansas State, I think after the game, you had Coleman Hawkins saying that, if we didn't give up that early run, like we feel like we should have won the game. And I mean, I guess technically he could say yes, but also at the same point in time, like that is why every part of the game matters. You don't just get to pick the parts of the game that you want. But nonetheless, Coleman Hawkins was great in that game. 15 points, 10 assists, 5 rebounds. They didn't get much from Brendan Housen, which they normally do. David Gasson was pretty good, 13 points on 5 of 7 shooting for them. And they really got good production from the big men just in general, right? You look at Onyenso, who's not really a big scorer, but between him and Gasson and Coleman Hawkins, they're 3 primary big men who play the 4 and the 5 position. Got a combined 37 points between those guys. For KU, though, DeJuan Harris was great. 15 points. He was 6 of 9 from the floor, also had 5 assists, 5 rebounds. Zeke Mayo was just making everything. He finished with 24 points. Hunter Dickinson was great. 12 of 19 from the floor, 25 points to go with 8 rebounds on the offensive end of the floor. And A.J. Storr got a good amount of minutes in that one, of 17 minutes and scoring 6 points. But what sticks out from the team perspective from that first matchup was that you look at Kansas having a really good offensive rebounding game. Kansas grabbed 43% of their offensive misses and out-rebounded Kansas State and, was better from that perspective. Kansas State only had 5 turnovers, though, which is a really low number. And Kansas has not been really doing a great job of forcing turnovers this year. That was, I think, more of the truth in that matter. And then the 3-point shooting. Both teams made 6 of them, but the difference was Kansas State took 26 of them. Kansas took 16 of them. So when you look at it from the Kansas State perspective, this has been a team who has shot well from 3 pretty much so far this season, to where I don't know that you can count on that happening again in this one. Beyond that, the final headline here is trying to snap a losing streak in Manhattan because they've lost the last 2. Jerome Tang is 2-0 since he's taken over as the K-State head coach in the games that have been in Manhattan. And I think what's interesting, I was actually thinking about this because I believe Grant McCasland, right, the head coach for Texas Tech, I want to say he before he was the head coach at Texas Tech, he was the head coach at North Texas, and before he was the head coach at North Texas, I want to say he has ties to Baylor. He does, yeah. He was an assistant coach at Baylor with Scott Drew. So, point being, the three coaches who are in the Big 12, who are the Scott Drew coaching tree, have low key kind of dominated Cam. Maybe not dominated because they're not like blowouts for the most part, but like you get what I mean in the home games, not in Allen Fieldhouse, but in the home games. Because think about it. KU hasn't won in Waco since 2020, so Baylor's won 5 straight home games against Kansas. Jerome Tang has won 2 straight home games against Kansas. And then Texas Tech beat Kansas with McCasland last year in Lubbock. So technically, you could say the Scott Drew coaching tree has collectively their 3 winning streaks at home against Kansas is 8. And that is pretty remarkable to think about. So maybe we'll see if Kansas can put a snap to that here in this one. The opponent scouting report. Kansas State comes in at 11-11 on the season. They are on that 4-game winning streak that we mentioned, 5-6 in Big 12 play. Those 4 straight wins. It came over West Virginia by 13 points, Oklahoma State by 28, Iowa State on the road by 19, which certainly, raises your eyebrows. And then Arizona State most recently by 1, a game that they were down, I think it was like 15-0 to start, like 18-3 or something like that to start the game. They battled back, and then Arizona State, doinks the free throws at the end of the game. So crazy win for them, but currently they're ranked in the top 65 on KenPom. They have a balanced offense and defense that are kind of right around that mark too. The personnel of note for Kansas State, Doug McDaniel, 5'11" point guard, 10 points, over 4 assists per game, only 25% from 3, but he's been shooting the ball better of late, and the track record says that he should. Speaking of shooting, Brendan Housen is their 6'4" sharpshooter, 12 points per game, 42% on high volume from 3-point range. And over his last 3 games, he's averaging 15 points per game on 11 of 18 from 3-point range. So you got to mark him. The good news is Kansas did a good job in the first game. He had just 7 points. He made just 1 3 in that first game, but you got to keep doing it here in this go around. 6'4", 220-pound wing Max Jones. He's playing a little bit more and seeing his stats go up lately too. 10 points, 4 rebounds per game, 41% from 3. So that's a good little duo there, and 4 straight games for him with 12 or more points. Then you look at the big man position. 6'9", 220, David Gasson. He can play the 4 or the 5, 12.5 points per game, 7 rebounds per game, 64%, can shoot it a little bit from 3. They have Coleman Hawkins, who is just doing a little bit of everything. 11 points, 7 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 2 steals, over a block per game on 41, 32, 60 shooting splits, and he also plays the 4 and the 5. And then they'll throw out Ugana Onyenso, who again, he had 9 points on 4 for 4 in the first meeting in Lawrence, and he comes out there and just brings in additional size. Other bench pieces of note, 6'1" freshman David Castillo, he struggled shooting. 6'5" guard CJ Jones, 6 points per game, 36% from 3, so certainly somebody to mark. And then 6'6" wing Moby Ikiguruka. I definitely mispronounced that. Anyway, when you look at what Kansas State does well, they've shot the ball well. In Big 12 games, they are 4th in 2-point percentage. They're 6th, so at least upper half in 3-point percentage on solid volumes, which if you're looking at their overall season numbers, the 3-point percentage is even better for them. So they've been a pretty good shooting team so far. And they have the 2nd best assist to field goal make rate in Big 12 only play. So they're moving the ball pretty well. Now, defensively, they've done a good job avoiding sending teams to the line, not giving up a ton of free throws. They have a top 4 2-point defense in league only play. And they have a solid turnover rate that hasn't been quite as good in conference play, but overall in the season is pretty good. Where they've struggled so far this season, they've been bad at offensive rebounding. They've been bad at defensive rebounding. So they've just been a bad rebounding team. We mentioned Kansas in the first matchup was able to take advantage of that. We'll see if they can do that again in Manhattan. They've also been bad at turning the ball over offensively, though oddly enough, it's not really coming from steals. They're having a lot of non-steal turnovers, which would be either the non-live ball turnovers where you're throwing it out of bounds, you're taking a shot clock violation, you're running into a charge, those kinds of ones. But we'll see if KU can certainly force more than the 5 turnovers you forced in the first game. Also, teams have shot 36% from 3 against Kansas State in Big 12 play. Is that something they're doing wrong? Are they leaving people too open too often? Or have they just been a little bit unlucky there? That kind of remains to be seen, but certainly something to keep an eye on headed into this matchup. All right, let's continue on with our keys to the game. Coming up next, this is Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick and you're cashing out. Check out the promos tab too, and you can tail any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Continuing on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, don't forget to make Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. Get you ready for the weekend ahead beyond the KUK State game. All right, keys to the game. Number 1, Kansas finishing at the rim. So in the first go-around, Kansas was excellent finishing at the rim. Obviously, Hunter Dickinson played a big part in this with his 25 points. Juwan Harris was really good finishing at the rim in the first matchup too. Overall, Kansas as a team shot 16 of 18. That's good for 89% on shots at the rim. In Big 12 play, Kansas is getting 36 paint points per game. That puts them in the 87th percentile nationally, so that's good. And then in conference play as well, Kansas State is giving up 33 paint points per game for their defense, which puts them in the 32nd percentile. So on paper, this is an advantage both ways for KU. But on the road, you have to finish, and I want to say it was the one last year. Maybe it was the one 2 years ago. Kansas just really struggled finishing at the rim in Manhattan, right? You wonder if that's the crowd, if it's whatever it is. And it is of note that while still above average nationally, Kansas's field goal percentage at the rim is definitely lower, than what they've done across all games. So across all games this season, all conference games, I should say, Kansas is shooting just the hair under 69% at the rim this season. But in road games, all road games this season, they're shooting 64%. Right? That is a pretty sizable drop. So can you be more, of what you normally are in a game like this to try to take advantage of something that on paper should be an advantage for you? Number 2, key to the game is don't let Hausen get hot, and just in general, kind of guarding the 3 ball if you're Kansas. Over the 4-game winning streak for Kansas State, Hausen is shooting 52% from 3-point range. So very good. And over the last 5 games, which is the number of games they've played since they lost to Kansas, he is shooting 50% from 3-point range. And that was after that bad game in Lawrence where he went just 1 for 5. So he's been on fire since then. Was he 1 for 5 in the game in Allen Fieldhouse because Kansas did an excellent job defending him? Was it just not his night? I mean, in a 1-game sample, right? That could be the difference of you miss just 1 extra 3 you normally make, and a 2 of 5 night, 40% is much different than a 1 of 5 night. So who knows exactly, but Kansas needs to, make things difficult on him and the rest of K-State from 3 in general, because especially you look at playing on the road, like 3 balls can be such a huge crowd momentum creator, and especially for a guy like Hausen who can really get hot from 3. So when you look at how the KU defense is played, I think one way for Kansas State to crack into that, which Kansas has played good defense here of late outside of, wasn't great in the home game against UCF, or the second half against Baylor. But like the overarching theme of the season has been Kansas does have a good defense. And for Kansas State, one way to, deal with that is just go nuts and go bombs away from 3. Obviously, Hausen is the main problem here when you're defending 3-point shots against Kansas State, but it is elsewhere too. They have 5 games, or the last 5 games, Kansas State is shooting 43% on above the break threes and 42% on corner threes. So that comes from a lot of different players on the team. That comes from a lot of different areas on the court. You have to do a good job chasing them off the 3-point line and sticking with shooters on the outside. Number 3, final key of the game for Kansas against Kansas State. Can you get the transition scoring going? On the season, Kansas is getting 11.5 transition points per game. That puts them in the 74th percentile nationally. So they're basically right around or in the top quartet of college basketball in terms of transition scoring. So they're pretty good at it. They're not as good. I mean, early in the season, they were getting 13 a game, but still pretty good at it. The reason, as I just mentioned earlier in the season, they were getting 13 points per game. The reason that number's dipped is because in conference play, they have seen that number drop severely. They're down to just 8.8 transition points per game, which is in just the 42nd percentile of college basketball. So in conference-only games, they are a below-average fast break offense right now, which is pretty crazy to think considering some of the things that, they do well and some of the players they have and the personnel that is suited to do that, right? Now, I guess part of that is like, well, AJ Storr is really good in transition, but he's been inconsistent with playing time. And, that can play into part of it too. But Kansas needs to figure this out. And I know on paper, it's like, oh, that's a 3-point difference. Like, how really important is that? Well, I don't know, like over the course of a season, that could be the difference of one extra win, that pushes you over the top. Or that could be the difference of 2 extra wins or something. So as good as the KU offense was in the first meeting with the Wildcats, because, that was up until that point, that was their most efficient game of the season. They didn't really do it in fast break. They only scored 6 fast break points among the 84 that they scored in the game. But I have a hunch that Kansas probably isn't going to, have as efficient of an offensive game as they had the first go around, right? And if that is the case, you have to find other ways. Maybe you don't shoot it as well, but can you find other ways to supplant the offense that you might be losing out on there? And I think scoring double that, right? Can you get to 12 fast break points? Like that would go in a long way to winning on the road and being able to do that. And for what it's worth, Kansas State has been about a nationally average team in transition defense this year. They're in the 46th percentile in transition points allowed per game. So it's not that this is something where Kansas isn't just ever going to be able to do it. You might get some opportunities, but you better take advantage of them in a game like this. And that's another way when you're on the road to quiet the crowd, right? You get a steal, you get a run out, you get an easy dunk, the crowd goes quiet, right? You get a run out and you get an easy layup, or just not having to be in a half court setting where you're going up, not just against a half court defense where things are more set, but now the student section can get into it and get loud while you're trying to run your offense and you can't hear Bill Self. You don't have to worry about that if it's in transition. So that's why that one is part of our keys to the game. Let's get to our players to watch, who's high on the go-off meter, and what is our player matchup of the game coming up on Locked On Jayhawks. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, where Super Bowl 59 is here, and you can go to FanDuel with 1 game, 2 teams, Chiefs, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's practicing or predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff all the way to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That is at FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. I continued on the show here with Locked On Jayhawks and finishing up with little players to watch for the Kansas State matchup. And we will have a KU K-State postcast. I'm going to be doing some broadcast stuff on Saturday, so I'll get that out to you later on Saturday. It won't be as immediate after the game as some of our other ones, but it will come out to you at some point this weekend for whatever happens in KU K-State. All right, player matchup to watch in this one, Coleman Hawkins versus KJ Adams. KJ Adams did not play in that first go-around against Kansas State, and it was super interesting because to that point in time, it was Kansas's most efficient by points per possession offensive game of the season, but it was also their least efficient defensive game of the season. And, some of that makes sense because you think of KJ as at times clogging up the offensive end of the court, but on defense, arguably being Kansas's best defender. And so it's this weird thing of like, well, what do you want more? Well, I think that he is very helpful for this specific matchup because, you look at KJ's coming off an unbelievable game, I think, defensively in what he put up against Iowa State. But you look at this matchup, and specifically, Kansas couldn't really find an answer for stopping the big men with Kansas State. And they basically said, hey, we have 2 big men out there. Like, if you're going to throw Rylan Griffin or AJ Storr as a small ball forward, we'll go inside to one of these guys. And then on top of it, it felt like Kansas couldn't figure out a way to stop Coleman Hawkins. As impactful as Flory can be on the defensive end, I do think there's still he has the mobility and athleticism to do it, but it's inconsistent what happens there when he is guarding out in space. And I think at times Coleman Hawkins took advantage of that. I think at times when it was AJ Storr, Rylan Griffin in there, Coleman Hawkins took advantage of the size mismatch there. I think KJ is the perfect blend to guard Coleman Hawkins in a matchup like this, where he has that ability to guard him from the perimeter, but also the strength to deal with him inside. I think when I look at Hawkins having 15 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds in the game in Lawrence, I would take the under on the combined points and assists being, 25 again in this one, because KJ, I think, is that good of a defender and can help you a lot in this specific matchup. Now, on the other end of the floor, it becomes interesting. What does Kansas State do with KJ Adams out there, right? Do they guard him? Do they not? Do they sag off of him? Who do they throw on him in a guarding position? How does Kansas take advantage of that? KJ just had a really good passing game to help dice up Iowa State. Is Kansas able to take advantage of that in some way against Kansas State? So I think there's a lot of interesting, chess match type things between Jerome Tang and Bill Self with having KJ Adams now into this matchup. But I do think it helps KU from that defensive perspective of helping to slow down one of Kansas State's best players in Hawkins with having KJ out on the floor and being able to say, hey, you had those nearly 40 points from your 3 big men. Now we can, bring Flory off the bench, and we feel like we have better big men depth this go around. We don't have to worry about the foul trouble as much to kind of match what you did last time. High on the go-off meter, we're going to go with Hunter Dickinson. He had 25 points on 12 of 19 against Kansas State in the matchup in Lawrence. He was really good in that matchup. And I think, to me, I view Gasson as being somebody who, he's a solid big man, but he's undersized when he's going up against Hunter Dickinson, right? Hunter's getting 5 inches and, 40 pounds. I don't know what Hunter weighs, but you have the size advantage. When it's Coleman Hawkins, right? Coleman Hawkins is a little bit taller, but he's even lighter in terms of the strength weight mismatch between Hunter and him. So I think that's good for Hunter. The question does become, going back to KJ, if by having KJ in there, does it make it more difficult from the spacing perspective for Hunter? But here's the thing. Hunter was playing a lot of that game next to Flory. And so in theory, like, Flory's a non-shooter too, right? It might be a little bit different in terms of Flory can finish on like a hook shot a little bit more than KJ can, or like can go through the defender maybe a little bit more because of the length. But still, I look at that and say, okay, that probably is going to be similar. So why can't Hunter have another big game this go around against Kansas State? And I should mention that I guess Hunter is averaging like 2 less points per game on the road than at home, but like that's not like a huge difference. So I think Hunter has another big game. I don't know if I'd quite go to 25 points, but I think he can have a big game, and they're going to need him to. Going back to one of our keys to the game, finishing around the rim, well, who's going to get probably the most shots in that specific area? Probably going to be Hunter Dickinson for KU. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. Check out all our bonus episodes. We had one on Jalen Daniels. We had one on Drayden Punt, the new commit for KU football, 6'7". We've had plenty of other conversations looking ahead to next year's basketball team. So find those anywhere you get your podcast here with Locked On Jayhawks or on our YouTube page. And again, we'll be back at you this weekend for a recap later on your weekend between whatever happens for the Jayhawks against the Wildcats. See you then with LOJ